At 65, Simon Cowell faces scandals that shattered his reputation. Accidents that nearly left him paralyzed, and losses that broke him in ways the public never saw until now. His life is not the glittering empire most imagined. It is a collection of tragedies carved into his body and soul. Once the most feared man on television, he built an empire of fame and fortune. But behind the sharp suits lies a man fighting battles that no stage could ever hide. Simon Cowell's story begins not with fame, but with silence. Born in 1959 in London, he grew up in a home that looked glamorous from the outside, but was fractured within. His mother, a ballet dancer, carried herself with elegance, but kept her emotions distant. His father, a music executive, measured love through achievement, never once telling his son, "I'm proud of you." For young Simon, affection was absent, replaced by cold expectations and constant comparison. School offered no escape. At Radlett Preparatory and later Dover College, he wasn't the star pupil, but the restless boy who clashed with authority and drifted on the margins. Teachers overlooked him. Peers outshined him, and the sense of invisibility took root. He scraped by academically, but each failure felt heavier than grades. It was proof that he wasn't enough. Those early wounds never left him. Years later, he would admit that his father's silence haunted him more than any insult. The boy, starved of recognition, would become a man determined to take it, no matter the cost. Rejection had carved scars deep into his childhood, but those scars would soon become the very fire that forged his relentless ambition. When Simon first entered the music business, it wasn't through a spotlight, but through the basement of EMI, sorting fan mail and carrying coffee. He was just another invisible face in the mail room, ignored by the very producers whose stars he served. Each day was a reminder that in an industry built on fame, he didn't even have a name. He later confessed, "I was invisible in a world obsessed with the spotlight." Humiliated and restless, he walked away, only to come crawling back when rejection outside the company stung even worse. Those years were filled with quiet tears in office bathrooms, moments when Simon wondered if his life had already peaked before it had even begun. But the humiliation hardened him, turning pain into persistence. He studied not just music, but how power itself operated. In the 1980s, he dared to take a leap with his own label, Fanfare Records. For a brief moment, it worked. Pop singles like So Macho gave him a taste of visibility, money, and attention. Parties, champagne, connections. He finally felt like he belonged. But success soured quickly. Trends shifted, sales collapsed, and by the decade's end, his empire was nothing but debts and empty promises. Simon returned to his parents' home in shame, sleeping once again in the childhood bedroom where he once dreamed of escape. Friends vanished, creditors circled, and for the second time in his life, he was invisible. This time as a failed entrepreneur. Later, he would admit, "That nearly broke me." Yet, even in that ruin, he refused to surrender because what Simon learned in those ashes would fuel the rise that made him unforgettable. The collapse of Fanfare could have ended Simon Cowell forever. Instead, it reshaped him. Returning to the industry in the 1990s, he carried not pride, but desperation. At BMG, he rebuilt himself from the ground up, abandoning the idea of chasing timeless artists. Instead, he focused on what ordinary people loved, even if critics sneered. "Sell records first, earn respect later," he would say. A philosophy born from necessity, not choice. That shift turned him into a quiet powerhouse. He signed acts others dismissed. Robson and Jerome, Westlife, names mocked by purists but adored by fans. Their singles soared to the top of charts, selling millions while so-called serious artists languished. He had learned the truth of fame. Perfection doesn't sell, emotion does. Simon turned rejection into a compass. Where others saw cheap pop acts, he saw opportunity. Where critics scoffed, he saw millions of fans ready to be heard. And with each success, he built the confidence to take his vision to the next stage. One that would not just sell records, but transform entertainment itself. Because the moment Simon Cowell stepped onto television, the world would never see him the same way again. By 2001, Simon Cowell was ready to step out from the shadows and into the glare of the cameras. When Pop Idol launched in the UK, many doubted him. They said he was too harsh, too cold, too unlikable to ever work on television. But what critics called cruelty, audiences recognized as honesty. His razor-sharp tongue and refusal to sugarcoat failure electrified viewers. The show was an instant phenomenon. And when American Idol followed in 2002, Simon became a household name almost overnight. Week after week, millions tuned in not just to watch contestants sing, but to hear Simon's verdict. His blunt put-downs, his raised eyebrows, his long-cutting silences. These moments became as iconic as the performances themselves. Soon, Simon wasn't just judging talent, he was shaping culture. The X Factor in the UK got talent spreading across the world. Formats stamped with his name reached over 600 million viewers across more than 100 countries. By the mid-2000s, the press called him the most powerful man in television. His words could launch careers, destroy dreams, or create global stars in an instant. "You have no talent, Simon. You're mean. But power comes with a price." As his empire grew, so did resentment. Tabloids painted him as a villain. Crowds booed him. Contestants broke down in tears under his blunt critiques. He later admitted, "I knew people hated me, but I also knew I couldn't pretend to be someone I wasn't." His honesty built the empire, but it also left him isolated. A king sitting on a throne that felt more like a prison. Behind the cameras, Simon's life grew lonelier. Endless auditions, relentless schedules, and global pressure drained him. The laughter of audiences was replaced by silence when he went home at night. The boy, once starved of affection, had become a man starved of peace. And soon, the empire he built would come crashing into scandal. In 2013, Simon Cowell's carefully controlled empire was rocked by a scandal that blindsided even him. News broke that he was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew. Overnight, the headlines screamed betrayal. The man who had built a career out of judging others now found himself on trial in the court of public opinion. It was one of the darkest moments of his life. Andrew filed for divorce. Friendships collapsed and whispers followed Simon into every room he entered. For a man who thrived on control, the humiliation was unbearable. Years later, Simon admitted simply, "It was not something I'm proud of." No excuses, no spin, just regret. But from the ashes of scandal came the most unexpected salvation, fatherhood. When his son Eric was born in 2014, everything changed. The ruthless mogul who once measured life in ratings and contracts now scheduled his days around bedtime stories and Lego towers. "My priorities completely shifted," he confessed. The sharpest judge on television softened into a devoted father, often saying that Eric had saved him from a dangerous path. Still, the scars of scandal lingered, trust was shattered, friendships were lost, and the guilt never fully faded. But for the first time, Simon found a role that mattered more than empire, being a dad. It was a fragile redemption, proof that even the most powerful man in television longed for something deeper than fame. Yet, just as fatherhood steadied him, life delivered its cruelest blows, reminding Simon that no amount of love could shield him from heartbreak. Just as fatherhood gave Simon Cowell a reason to heal, tragedy struck again. In 2015, his mother, Julie Brett, passed away at 89. To the public, it seemed a natural end to a long life. But for Simon, it was devastation. Julie had been the quiet anchor in his stormy childhood, the one person whose approval he always craved. "Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever gone through," he admitted softly. The grief stripped away the armor he had worn for decades. But fate wasn't finished testing him. In August 2020, while testing a powerful new electric bike in the courtyard of his Malibu home, disaster struck. One moment of miscalculation and Simon was thrown violently to the ground. His back shattered in multiple places. Hours of surgery followed. A steel rod implanted in his spine and doctors warning he might never walk again. "I came within a minute of not making it," Simon later revealed. For a man defined by control, the irony was brutal. The titan of television, once commanding global audiences, was suddenly confined to a hospital bed, unable to lift a glass of water without agony. Even after months of rehabilitation, his recovery was grueling. Standing required assistance, and each step felt like climbing a mountain. And then, cruelly, it happened again. In early 2022, Simon suffered another bike crash. This time, shattering his arm and bruising his face. The headlines mocked him, calling him reckless, fragile, even foolish. But behind the jokes was a man facing his own fragility, stripped of the invincibility he once projected. The boy who once feared invisibility was now terrified of something worse, leaving his son without a father. As Simon struggled with pain and recovery, another battle unfolded, not in his spine, but in his reflection. For years, he had quietly turned to cosmetic procedures. Botox, fillers, touch-ups designed to hold back time under the harsh glare of television lights. At first, the changes were subtle, but by 2021, fans were stunned. His face looked stiff, swollen, almost unrecognizable. Headlines blared, "What happened to Simon Cowell's face?" Memes spread mercilessly. The judge had become the judged. The irony was cruel. For decades, Simon built an empire by evaluating appearances, by deciding who was star material and who wasn't. Now, he was the one being mocked, dissected, and ridiculed. In rare honesty, he admitted, "I went too far. There was a point I looked in the mirror and literally didn't recognize myself." It was more than vanity. It was an identity crisis. The ridicule forced him into retreat. He reduced his public appearances, skipped promotional tours, and let others take the spotlight. Insiders whispered he looked tired, softer, diminished. The sharp sparkle that once terrified contestants seemed dulled. For the first time, Simon truly understood what it meant to be exposed. Eventually, he made a choice. Enough. He abandoned cosmetic work entirely, allowing age to reclaim what needles had altered. "I'd rather chase memories with Eric than chase youth," he confessed. The decision marked a quiet surrender, but also a rare peace. He no longer needed to appear invincible. He was ready to be real. But just as he made peace with himself, tragedy would strike again. This time in a way that shattered his heart. In September 2024, Simon Cowell faced a loss that no amount of money, fame, or resilience could prepare him for. Liam Payne, the boy he first saw nervously auditioning at just 16, the voice he believed in when few others did, was suddenly gone. At only 31, Liam's fall from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires stunned the world. To fans, it was shocking. To Simon, it was devastating. This wasn't just another headline. Liam wasn't simply a contestant. He was family. Simon had been the architect of One Direction, the band that defined a generation. Watching Liam grow from an insecure teenager into a global superstar had been one of Simon's proudest achievements. To lose him so young felt unnatural, merciless. It was like losing a son, he whispered to a close friend. For days, the world mourned. Vigils lit up cities. Fans flooded social media with tributes. And One Direction's music echoed everywhere like a ghost of what had been. But Simon's grief was private and crushing. He paused projects, stayed away from cameras, and clung to the one thing he still had, his son, Eric. Friends noticed how tightly he held him. As if each laugh and bedtime story carried the weight of all the moments Liam would never live to see, the loss scarred him. For the first time, Simon began speaking less of empire and more of legacy, less of ambition, more of presence. Liam's death forced him to confront life's most brutal truth. Even the brightest stars can vanish without warning. And now at 65, the once ruthless judge who ruled television sits not as a titan, but as a man forever marked by loss, fighting time itself and searching for peace in the scars he carries. At 65, Simon Cowell is no longer the ruthless king of primetime television, but a man reshaped by survival, tragedy, and fragile redemption. The boy, once starved of affection, became the mogul who built an empire, but at a cost that left scars deeper than fortune could ever hide. Scandals shattered his image. Accidents nearly left him paralyzed, and losses carved grief into his soul. Yet, through it all, he found something more lasting than ratings, the love of his son and the humility of survival. Today, Simon speaks less about power and more about presence. His legacy isn't just the stars he discovered or the empires he built, but the reminder that even those who seem untouchable are fighting battles no camera sees. Perhaps the tragedy of Simon Cowell isn't only in what he lost, but in what it cost to finally discover who he really is. Drop a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood tales.